The rhythmic clack-clack, clack-clack of the wheels on the track was supposed to be a lullaby, but for me, it was a metronome counting down the miles I was putting between myself and the smoking wreckage of my life. My name is Leo, and I was running. The Starlight Ascendant was a silver serpent snaking its way through the snow-dusted peaks of the Colorado Rockies. A gleaming, modern machine cutting through a landscape that hadn't changed in a million years. I'd chosen the train specifically because I couldn't bear the thought of getting behind the wheel of a car. Not after the accident. Not after what happened to Daniel. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. It was where the nightmares lived, replaying the sickening crunch of metal and the sight of my brother's lifeless eyes. So I sat awake, staring out the wide observation window of the nearly empty carriage. It was well past midnight. Outside, a vast, silent world of dark pines and moon-bleached snow swept by. The isolation was the point. There was nothing out there but wilderness and regret. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, my own reflection a pale, hollow-eyed ghost staring back at me. I looked tired, broken. As I stared, something flickered in the reflection. For a split second, the image warped. The modern, blue-upholstered seats of the carriage in my reflection were suddenly a deep, worn-out red velvet. The few other silent passengers were no longer in modern clothes, but in heavy coats and hats from the 1960s. And my own reflection, it wasn't me. It was a different man, older with a sharp jawline and a fedora tilted low over his eyes. I recoiled from the window, blinking hard. I looked back. The reflection was normal again. Just me, the blue seats, and the sleeping passengers. Exhaustion, I muttered to myself, rubbing my burning eyes. You haven't slept in 2 days, Leo. Your brain is short-circuiting. I surveyed my fellow travelers again, trying to ground myself in reality. There were only 3 others in my car, an elderly woman in the seat in front of me, endlessly knitting a gray scarf, her needles clicking softly. Across the aisle, an old man sat ramrod straight, his face completely obscured by a broadsheet newspaper. A young woman a few rows back was asleep, her head resting against the window. They were all islands of silence, disconnected from each other, disconnected from the world. There was an unnerving stillness about them. The air in the carriage was growing stale. I needed coffee. I needed to move. I stood up and made my way towards the front of the train, heading for the dining car. The door between carriages slid open with a pneumatic hiss. I stepped into the vestibule, the accordion-like connection between the cars, and the change was instantaneous and violent. The temperature plummeted, a biting, unnatural cold that seemed to seep into my bones. The rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels was drowned out by a deafening, high-pitched screech of metal on metal, a sound of catastrophic failure. The lights overhead flickered wildly, strobing between glaring brightness and absolute darkness. It felt like the train was being torn apart. I stumbled through the violently shaking connector, my hands grasping for balance, and burst through the door into the next carriage. Instantly, it was over. The sound returned to the normal, gentle rhythm. The lights were steady. The temperature was comfortable. It was as if nothing had happened. I stood there panting, my heart hammering. No one else seemed to have noticed. Had I imagined it? It felt too real, too visceral. A figure in a dark blue uniform stepped out from a small compartment. The conductor. He was a tall, gaunt man who looked as old as the mountains themselves. His face was a landscape of deep wrinkles, and his eyes were dark and hollow like empty tunnels. The uniform was immaculate but old-fashioned, the brass buttons tarnished with age. "Everything all right, son?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. The connection between the cars," I stammered. "The lights, the noise?" The conductor simply gave a slow, sad nod. He didn't offer an explanation or look surprised. He just looked weary. He glanced at me, his gaze lingering, but he didn't ask for my ticket. He seemed to look right through me, as if reading a story written on my soul. "Not long now," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the train. "We'll be at the bridge soon. Everyone's waiting to get across." He then tipped his cap and continued down the aisle, his footsteps making no sound on the carpeted floor. His words sent a fresh chill down my spine. A bridge? I had studied the route before I booked the ticket. It was a modern line, There were no major bridges or trestles for at least another 100 miles. I was now wide awake, my exhaustion replaced by a creeping electric dread. Something was profoundly wrong with this train. I abandoned my quest for coffee and returned to my seat, my mind racing. I pulled out my phone again, hoping for a stray bar of signal. Nothing. I stared out the window, watching the endless parade of snow and trees, trying to make sense of it all. The train began to round a long, sweeping bend, its silver body curving like a snake. As we came around the mountain, the view opened up into a wide moonlit valley, and the world outside the window broke. It was no longer night. The landscape was suddenly bathed in the brilliant, harsh light of a midday sun. The snow was gone, replaced by the lush green of a summer valley. Below us, a wide churning river snaked through a deep canyon, and spanning that canyon was an old skeletal wooden railway bridge. As our train continued its curve, I saw it. On the bridge below, another train, an identical, gleaming silver serpent, was crossing the canyon. I watched, frozen in a state of impossible, silent horror, as the wooden trestle bridge beneath the other train began to splinter. Great timbers snapped like matchsticks. The bridge buckled in the middle, and the silver train, our train's doppelganger, was thrown from the tracks. Car after car plunged into the churning river below in a silent, slow-motion ballet of destruction. There was no sound, no explosion, just a terrible, silent vision of a catastrophe. Just as quickly as it appeared, the vision vanished. Our train completed its turn, and the view outside snapped back to the dark, moonlit, snowy landscape of the present. I was panting, my hands pressed against the cold glass, my mind screaming. It was a hallucination. It had to be. I tore my eyes away from the window and looked at the other passengers. The knitting woman hadn't moved, but the old man across the aisle had lowered his newspaper. The paper was yellowed and brittle with age, the print faded, but I could read the headline stark and bold across the top of the front page. Silver Serpent plunges into canyon. Hundreds feared dead beneath it. In smaller print was the date. May 12th, 1962. The old man slowly looked up from the paper, his eyes meeting mine. They were not hollow as I'd first thought. They were filled with an ancient, bottomless sorrow. He leaned forward slightly, his voice a dry, rustling whisper that carried across the aisle. "We never made it across," he said. The old man's words hung in the silent carriage like icicles. We never made it across. My mind reeled, refusing to accept the insane logic presented by the impossible newspaper in his hands. This had to be a dream, a waking nightmare brought on by days of grief and sleeplessness. I shot to my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound was jarring, intrusive. The other passengers didn't even flinch. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice a harsh croak. "What is this? Some kind of sick joke?" The old man looked up at me, his face a mask of placid sorrow. There was no malice in his eyes, only a profound ancient weariness. "It is no joke, son," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. A journey interrupted. A story without an ending. That is what this train is, what we are. He folded the 1962 newspaper with meticulous, slow care and placed it on the seat beside him. "You shouldn't be here. Your story is not yet finished." "I'm getting off at the next station," I lied, more to myself than to him. I turned and stumbled down the aisle, away from his knowing, pitying gaze. I had to prove this wasn't real. I burst into the dining car, expecting to find it dark and empty. It was not. The car was bathed in a soft golden light, and it was full of people. Men in crisp suits and fedoras, women in elegant dresses and gloves, all seated at tables covered in white linen. A waiter in a starched white jacket walked by, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. The air hummed with the murmur of conversations. But as I listened, I realized I couldn't understand a single word. It was like hearing a crowd from underwater, the sounds blurred and indistinct. Everyone was dressed immaculately. Everyone was smiling and talking, but their eyes were vacant. They were performing a memory. I was the only one who didn't belong, a ghost from their future in their ghost train. I backed out of the dining car, a cold sweat breaking out on my brow. I needed to see the other end of the train. I moved through carriage after carriage, each one a different snapshot of the past. In one car, a group of soldiers in old uniforms were playing cards, their movements a silent repeating loop. In another, a mother was rocking a crying baby, but the baby was just a bundle of blankets, and the crying was a silent, psychic echo of grief that made my teeth ache. This train wasn't just haunted. It was a scar on time, a recording of hundreds of lives cut short, trapped forever in their final mundane moments. And for some reason, I had been allowed to walk through it. Then, I heard it, a voice that cut through the ghostly murmur, a voice that didn't belong to 1962, a voice that belonged to my own personal hell. "You always hog the controller, Leo. It's my turn." It was Daniel's voice, my younger brother, clear as day, laughing from just a few feet away. I froze, my blood turning to ice. I followed the sound into the next carriage, a sleeper car. The corridor was narrow and dark. The voice came from behind one of the closed compartment doors. "You promised you'd take me to the arcade after practice," the voice continued, laced with the playful indignation only a younger brother can muster. It was a perfect echo of our last conversation, the last stupid argument we ever had, minutes before I got behind the wheel. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling. But before I could open it, the gaunt ancient conductor appeared at the end of the corridor, as if materializing from the shadows. "It is unwise to open a door to a room that is not your own, son," he whispered, his voice full of a strange authority. "The memories in this train are not for you." "What is this place?" I demanded, my voice breaking. "Why can I hear my brother?" The conductor glided closer, his footsteps still making no sound. "The Silver Serpent is a vessel. It carries those whose journeys were cut short with a heavy heart, a regret, an unspoken word, a promise unkept." He stopped in front of me, his hollow eyes seeming to look straight into my soul. But sometimes the living carry burdens so heavy, their grief so loud, that it resonates at the same frequency as our own. The train. It hears you. It sees a fellow traveler, and it invites you aboard. The horrifying truth settled over me like a funeral shroud. I wasn't here by chance. I was here because the crushing guilt I carried over Daniel's death was a beacon, a signal that had called this ghost train to me out of the mists of time. "So what happens now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Do I just ride this train forever?" "That is one possibility," the conductor said, his face impassive. "The train is approaching the bridge, the place where our journey ended. When we arrive, we will relive that final moment. The screech of the brakes, the snapping of the timber, the fall into the cold, dark water. We have done so 1,000 times. Most living passengers who join us simply stay. Their despair at the end is so great they become a permanent part of our chorus." My stomach clenched. To die in a fiery crash once was a tragedy. To be forced to relive it for eternity was a damnation I couldn't comprehend. "Is there another way?" I asked, desperation clawing at my throat. The conductor was silent for a long moment. "The train collects regret," he finally whispered. "It is what fuels it. But it also recognizes when a burden is set down." He pointed a long, bony finger towards the emergency exit door at the end of the vestibule. It was a heavy steel door with a large lever. "When we reach the bridge, the final moments will begin. The lights will flicker. You will hear the metal begin to screech. In that moment, for the first time on the journey, that door will be unlocked. The train offers a choice to its living passengers. You can try to jump." Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered within me. "Jump? Jump where?" "Into the snow, into the night, into your own time," he said. "But the door will only remain open for a few seconds. And to pass through it, you must leave your luggage behind." He gestured back towards the compartment door from which I'd heard my brother's voice. "The train will not release a soul that is still shackled. To escape the echo of our tragedy, you must first escape your own. You must face the memory that brought you here, and let it go." The proposition was impossible. To let go of Daniel? To forgive myself? The guilt was the only thing I had left of him. It was the penance I had sentenced myself to for the rest of my life. As if on cue, a faint, high-pitched sound began to echo from the front of the train, a sound of immense pressure of metal straining against metal. It was a sound I had heard before in the vestibule. The conductor gave a final sad nod. "The bridge is coming, Leo," he said before turning and vanishing into the shadows of the corridor. I was alone, standing between a door that held the ghost of my brother and a door that offered an impossible escape. The high-pitched screeching grew louder, a symphony of imminent destruction. The lights overhead began to flicker. The screeching was no longer a distant sound. It was a physical assault, a high-pitched scream of tortured metal that vibrated through the floor and up my spine. The lights in the carriage flickered in a frantic, dying rhythm, plunging us into strobing moments of darkness and ghostly light. The other passengers, the echoes of 1962, were stirring. Their silent, looped memories were breaking. Their heads turned, their vacant eyes now wide with the dawning eternal terror as they began to relive their final moments. The train was not just a recording anymore. It was a memory brought to life, and we were all hurtling towards the climax. My own memory, my own personal ghost, was calling to me from behind the compartment door. Daniel's voice, now no longer laughing but whispering my name with a chilling sadness. The conductor's words echoed in my head. "To escape the echo of our tragedy, you must first escape your own." He said I had to let go, but how do you let go of a ghost that has become a part of your own soul? The guilt was all I had left. The train gave a violent lurch, throwing me against the corridor wall. The high-pitched screeching was now accompanied by the groaning of stressed metal and the phantom sound of splintering wood. The bridge. We were on the bridge. I looked at the emergency exit at the end of the vestibule. It was too far. It felt a million miles away. Then I looked at the compartment door. I knew I couldn't reach the exit without first passing through this one. With a resolve born of pure desperation, I reached out and slid the compartment door open. The world outside the door was not a train compartment. I was hit by the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and the sound of drumming rain against a car roof. I was no longer standing. I was sitting in the driver's seat of my Honda Civic. My hands were gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white. The train, the screeching, the ghosts. All of it was gone, replaced by the suffocating, intimate horror of my own worst memory. In the passenger seat next to me was Daniel. He wasn't a ghost. He was solid, real, looking exactly as he had in his final moments, his face illuminated by the green glow of the dashboard. He was angry. "I can't believe you said that, Leo," he said, his voice sharp with hurt. "Just because you're the older brother doesn't mean you can decide my whole life for me. I just don't think it's a good idea." "Dan," I heard myself say, the words tasting like ash in my mouth as I was forced to relive the argument. "Taking a year off before college to find yourself is a stupid cliché. It's my life," he shot back. The argument played out, every bitter, stupid word exactly as I remembered it. It was a pointless fight, born of my own fear of him growing up and leaving. As my memory self spoke the cruel words, the real me, the observer trapped inside, was screaming. "Stop the car, apologize, tell him you love him." But I was powerless, a passenger in my own past. The rain intensified, hammering on the windshield. The road became a slick black mirror, and then I saw it. The flash of headlights from the truck that had lost control, jackknifing across the highway directly in our path. My memory self screamed and yanked the wheel. The world became a violent, tumbling chaos of shattering glass and the horrific final sound of metal tearing itself apart. The memory should have ended there. That's where it always ended in my nightmares. But this time, it didn't. The chaos subsided and I was left in a profound, ringing silence. I was still in the driver's seat of the wrecked car, but the world outside was a calm, star-filled void. Daniel was still sitting next to me. He was no longer angry. He was looking at me with an expression of deep, heartbreaking sadness. "It's not your fault, Leo," he said, his voice soft. "I was driving too fast," I choked out. The confession I had never been able to make to anyone, not even myself. I was angry. I wasn't paying enough attention. It was my fault. "No," Daniel insisted, his ghostly form shimmering slightly. "It was an accident. A terrible, stupid accident. But it wasn't your fault. This guilt, you've been carrying it for so long. It's so heavy, Leo. It's so heavy it called this train to you." He reached out, his hand almost touching my shoulder. "You have to put it down. You have to let me go." I'm at peace. You need to be too. Tears I didn't know I still had streamed down my face. All this time, I thought holding on to the guilt was how I honored his memory, but I was just torturing myself and desecrating the memory of the brother who had loved me. I'm so sorry, Dan, I sobbed. I know, he said, and for the first time in a year he smiled. A genuine, peaceful smile. Now go, live your life. That's all I ever wanted. As he spoke, his form began to fade, dissolving into motes of soft, golden light. The wrecked car around me dissolved as well, and the star-filled void was replaced by the strobing, chaotic lights of the train carriage. I was back. The train was in its death throes, tilting at an impossible angle, the floor groaning as it buckled. The ghosts of the passengers were being thrown about, their silent screams now a deafening psychic roar. But the crushing weight in my own soul was gone. I was lighter. I was free. At the end of the violently shaking vestibule, the lever on the emergency exit door was glowing with a faint white light. It was unlocked. I scrambled towards it, climbing over debris, pushing past the translucent forms of the panicking ghosts. I reached the door, the metal cold and solid beneath my fingers. I grabbed the heavy lever and threw all my weight into it. With a groan of protesting metal, the door flew open. Outside was not the snowy landscape of the Rockies. It was a swirling white vortex of wind and snow and pure roaring sound. It was the void between the train's time and my own. It was a leap of faith. With one last look at the chaos behind me, I jumped. The sensation was of falling through ice, a disorienting, freezing tumble through nothingness. I landed with a soft, heavy thump in something deep and cold. Snow. I was lying in a deep snowdrift, gasping, the freezing air a shocking, beautiful pain in my lungs. I pushed myself up and looked back. The starlight ascendant, the true silver serpent, was thundering past me on the tracks, but it was no longer solid. It was a shimmering, translucent ghost, a ribbon of sorrowful light against the dark mountains. Through its spectral windows I could see the passengers. I saw the knitting woman, the soldiers playing cards, and the old man with the newspaper. He looked towards me, and for a moment his eyes met mine. He gave me a single, slow, respectful nod. The train reached the invisible point in the air where the bridge had once stood. It didn't crash. It didn't fall. It simply faded. The silver carriages grew more transparent. The lights within them softened, and the entire train dissolved into a shower of fading golden sparks that were swept away by the wind. Finally completing its journey, I was alone. The silence of the mountains was profound and peaceful. The crushing weight of guilt was gone, replaced by the clean, sharp ache of loss. It still hurt, but it was a hurt I could live with. I pulled out my phone. In the top corner, a single beautiful bar of signal glowed. My hands were steady as I dialed 911. My voice, for the first time in a year, was clear. I was ready to be found.